three. They are different in the terms of the global crisis that we're facing. Oops, sorry. I'm sorry. I should have waited longer. Yeah, here it is.
What were you going to say?
Yeah, what?
I was thinking a little different. I was thinking asylum, when you seek asylum, is because your country will not allow you to leave, versus a country that you can leave for. But
It does have.
wrong. I should have just said that.
It's similar. It has
I
to.
like that the way you were thinking.
Yeah, you are definitely in the right track. It has to do with the permissions that you receive and the things that you're allowed to do before you leave. So a refugee has it a little bit easier than an asylum seeker. They get permission before they ever get to the United States or Canada or Australia or wherever they're going. They get stamped refugee before they ever leave that second country that they first fled to. And an asylum seeker gets here on their own. Those are the folks that, we don't know about, that we don't really know anything about them. And then they get here and then they want to get help after the fact. Once their boots are already on our soil, that's when they want a little bit of help and protection. So about half of the world's refugee population comes from 3 countries. I did not know this about Somalia. That's something I learned when I was putting this together. The really interesting thing about this is that that bit about Syria right there, that there are more Syrian refugees than there are people who live in Los Angeles, depending on what numbers you look at. So it basically, the same amount of people that live in Los Angeles are the same amount of Syrian refugees there are in the world right now who can't go to their homes because they've been blown up or because they think they're going to die if they return to their homes. And that's how many people we're talking about that need help. Another interesting thing about the global refugee population is that most of them don't live in camps. So we hear about refugees living in camps. We hear about that a lot. The average stay in a refugee camp is 17 years. And that's only 20 to 30% of the refugee population live in these camps. The rest live in urban settings. So they flee to Jordan or wherever, and they try to assimilate into that society, that country of first asylum, is that what it's called? The first country they go to? They try to integrate into that first country that they flee to, and that's a lot harder for them in a lot of ways because they aren't afforded the same types of protections that a refugee in a camp gets, which is sort of weird to think about, that the camps are actually the easier, I don't know about easier, but you don't get the same kinds of protections in a camp as if you were to live in an urban setting, and most people do live in urban settings. And that's because the camps are overflowing. They're so full. Ooh, I've got a paragraph here. Refugees who take shelter in urban settings must struggle to survive as unrecognized residents. In these situations, they are unable to contribute to and integrate into the community as they live in the shadows, fearful of deportation back to the threats of their home countries. Adults do not have the right to legitimate work and must take jobs that pay meager wages. In some countries, children can't register for school and families can't access health care. When a refugee flees their country, the global community has 3 goals for them. The primary goal is repatriation, and that is reuniting an individual with their home country, sending them back to where they came from. This is everybody's goal. If we had to flee Southern California, we would probably want to come back home eventually. That would be what we would want to do. And this is actually what happens to most people. They do end up going back home to these countries that they came from. The second thing that's going to happen is they're going to locally integrate into that first country they went to. Again, we have Jordan as a pretty big example of that. The third option that could happen, if not repatriation or local integration, is resettlement in a third country, and less than half of 1% of all refugees ever get resettled into a third country. So that number, all those tens of millions of people that we saw worldwide that can't go back home, they're not going anywhere else after they flee. They're staying put. So like I said, less than half of 1% will ever get resettled into a third country. These are the women and children and vulnerable persons that aren't safe, that can't go back home. dang it. I had a video for you all, but the audio wasn't working. So, if you want to jot it down, it's a video that Secretary Jay Johnson did a voiceover for. It's 4 minutes long. That, I don't know if you've ever seen those YouTube videos that are ATTN semicolon. They do really good job of, I don't know, putting together really great animations. And Jay Johnson participated in one and provides a really good overview of refugee resettlement. And it talks a little bit about Syrians and how they play into the global context. That's a lot of gibberish in that link. You could also probably just do that search query alone, Jay Johnson refugees, and it'll probably come up if you don't want to write down all those letters.
Question,
Yes.
there's a dot in between the U and the B. Is that supposed to be there under YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so YouTube.b at gibberish. And we have printouts of all the slides too. So if you want to print out of all the slides, including this one, if you want to go look at this when you get home and share that video, or at least watch that video. When a person flees their country, they're most likely to go to the Middle East or North Africa and then to the Americas. America, or the United States, takes in the largest amount of refugees out of all of the countries that take in refugees as that third country. So we take in the largest amount once we get to that step. But when they are first displaced, this is what we're looking at. This is where they're going. Not a whole lot in Europe. So that always interests me when I look at that. We hear a whole lot about how Germany just has these floodgates that are open, and look at all these problems that they're having, and they actually take in far fewer than we do, and that's because their vetting system is not as stringent as ours.
Does anyone know how many refugees were getting through the pipeline this 2016? Were allowed by Congress?
10,500.
Those specific. We actually exceeded that goal by 2,000.
Yeah.
So as of recently, we've been given the green light to start fiscal year in October.
Can't hear.
Oh, sorry, I do have.
So we've actually been just given the go-ahead to increase the numbers. We had from 75,000 to 85,000, and then we asked for 10,000 Syrians, and we exceeded our goal, and now we're at 12,000 Syrians, and so we're asking for higher numbers. And so now we are jumping from the 85,000 mark to the 110,000 mark for the fiscal year of 2017. And we don't think that we won't meet that goal. So.
This is my favorite part. So the vetting process is one that we hear a lot about in the news. I think we're kind of worried that so-and-so is going to slip through the cracks and we're going to have a catastrophe. I don't think any of the major national incidents on U.S. soil have been from a refugee. I think they've all been homegrown problems. Correct me if anybody knows that for sure. Because the vetting process to get here is pretty tough. No system is perfect, but this one is pretty airtight, as in the words of another presenter I heard a while back. It's a pretty airtight system. The vetting process for all refugees involves lengthy security screenings, collection of biometrics. These are fingerprints and iris scans. I don't know what they do with the iris scans, but they collect them. And lots of background checks. Their biometrics are ran through several international databases for any red flags. If any red flags are raised during the vetting process, they are denied refugee status and entry into the United States. Once a refugee is referred to the United States for resettlement, a long and involved vetting process begins. This may take as long as 2 years to complete and is fraught with uncertainty at every turn for the refugee. In all, including the original UNHCR agency that determines refugee status, 11 different international agencies are involved in this security screening. In other words, extreme vetting already exists. This is the most stringent vetting process required for any type of visa to come to the States. One of my volunteers said something really interesting a while back. She said, I don't know why people think we don't know who these people are, because they are literally the only people we know anything about because of how much information is collected on the individuals who are going through this process. It's not ideal. It's not a fun process to go through. The first step that happens is they are registered with the UNHCR and their refugee status, is confirmed. I don't know if I said this earlier. The UNHCR is the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees. Second step that happens is they are referred to the United States. Several different reasons they might get referred here. The most likely being that they have somebody here that's vouching for them, a friend or a relative that knows them. The Resettlement Support Center interviews the refugee. The Department of State checks the refugee's name against the U.S. watch list through its consular lookout and support system. The National Counterterrorism Center conducts an interagency check. I have too many pages up here, I'm distracting myself. Certain refugees undergo an additional security advisory opinion. The National oops, did I go backwards?
No.
There's too many steps. Syrian refugees are flagged for additional screening. USCIS conducts an in-person interview with the refugee abroad at their location. If approved, the USCIS officer submits the application to the Department of State for final processing. The USCIS then coordinates 3 biometric checks.